hosting this, and I know that you're in Maryland. I was just kind of surprised to see people all over the country. That is just the neatest thing ever. So, loving the fact that everybody joined us today. I'm going to start with my camera on. I'll probably turn it off at some point, just so you know. My internet is just a little bit wonky here in Delaware. So, our topic today is what you need to know when a resident hoards. I don't know that I'm going to give you all the answers, but we're certainly going to have a dialogue about it. I'll give you some considerations, some things to think about. And yeah, as Sarah said, please, if you have questions or comments or thoughts, pop those in the chat. There's a ton of stuff to get through, so I will do my level best to address all of those as well. So I am in Delaware. I said that in the chat. I am the National Director of Education with Select Rehabilitation. And that's probably all you need to know about me. It's sunny here today. So you can see I'm squinting, which is kind of funny. So these are the objectives for today. We're going to talk about the scope of hoarding and senior living. We're going to talk very specifically how that differs from collecting, because it does begin as collecting, but it doesn't end there. We'll talk about signs of hoarding behaviors and what impact they may have on health and well-being. We'll talk about some strategies that you might use to address and reduce hoarding behavior. And I say in residence, again, this could be senior housing. This can be assisted living, independent living, skilled nursing. This could be someone's home in a neighborhood where they're living. That's really anywhere people are living. And then some verbal and nonverbal communication strategies that you might utilize to address hoarding. Okay. So I start off with a few stories, and I know you all have stories as well. And you've probably heard some of these. If you've worked in senior living for a time, you've heard, hey, state's going to be here any minute. We have to pack up all this junk. Maintenance is there at the door with a dolly and boxes. We got to get rid of your junk. I had a situation where there were two individuals living in the same space, in the same room, and both were hoarders, which is kind of funny, not in a good way. And one person said, well, why are you telling me to clean up and throw my things away when look at her? Her place is messier than my space. So why aren't you having the same conversation with her? Again, you hear some of these, oh, we're going to pack all this up. Once the state leaves, then we'll bring it all back to you. Or worst case, again, this happened in a situation where I was working. They didn't bring it back. They threw it all away, which is so awful. And this person, said to us, wow, I trusted them. They betrayed me. How could they have done this to me? So, a serious issue for that person. So again, I know there's a ton of stories out there, and feel free to share those. So I'm just going to periodically check the chat. So, okay, so what is hoarding? In full disclosure, I have like 90 some slides. I don't intend to read all of these at you. I'm going to hit some of the high points, and then you can certainly review the slides. I'm not a fan of reading things at you, but you can see the definition right on this slide. Persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of actual value. Now, what's interesting is this has been around for a very long time. This isn't new, but in 2013, it was finally added to the DSM. Hoarding disorder was added as an actual disorder. So that's important to note. Hold on. There we go. So, when we look at compulsive hoarding as a definition, there are three things that are included here. A person collects and keeps a lot of items, even things that appear useless to us, of no value to us. They may look like garbage to us. They clutter their living spaces. They keep that person from using spaces as they were intended. Maybe they can't get into the shower, they can't use their kitchen, what have you. And it not only causes distress, but it causes problems in their day to day function, their day to day activities. Now, I was giving this presentation, I don't remember where, it's not important. And somebody said to me, oh, we have so and so, she lives in our community and she is a hoarder. I said, okay, well, tell me the story. What's going on here? And she said, well, she's an artist and she has, a box of paintbrushes and a box of this and a box of that. And she's going through this description. And she said, and all of these boxes are stacked all over her apartment. And I said, okay, so what's the problem here? She was collecting a lot of these things. I said, can she get to her kitchen? Can she get to her bathroom? Can she get to her bathroom? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. She can get to everything. She's fully functional, da da da. But she's a hoarder. And I said, well, For whom is this really a problem? And I think it's a question we have to ask because those of us who work in senior care or with seniors in general will say, oh, she's a hoarder. And we go down this list. But is it really a problem for that person? Or is it a problem for me that I don't like seeing the clutter or I don't really understand why this person is retaining some of these items? And in this case, this stuff was stacked all over the place. If you went in and said, "Hey, find me blue, tempera paint," she could find that paint immediately. That's not hoarding. That's very, very organized. Now, there's a lot of stuff, but it's not necessarily hoarding. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. We have to really dial it back and just figure out, is it an issue for me? Is it an issue for them? And is it really impacting their day to day function? Okay, so if you're hoarding, you might feel the need to get more things, even if you have a lot already. So for the hoarder, it's not about collecting, it's about possessing. The joy they have from just acquiring more and more things. And they have very strong, very positive feelings when they have all of these things. And once they have them, they get very anxious if somebody touches them, if somebody throws them away. They're not sure. They have a lot of difficulty trying to figure out, what can I throw away? What should I keep? They can't organize. And again, as I said, they can't necessarily live or, work, function in parts of their environment. Now, when we look in senior living, and it's really any aspect, I think, of senior living, there's three things that we see. First is this refusal to get rid of things when they're no longer useful, or they collect things that are not useful. I worked with an individual who, for whatever reason, collected red plastic spoons. That was it, no more, no less. Found them in the trash, found them in the facility, and just had this, massive collection of plastic spoons. Again, no longer useful. They ask people to bring things in that they don't need or that they don't have space for. So bring in my Hummel collection, bring in my, whatever. And then you walk into their space and there's all these, tchotchkes or whatever that don't belong there. And then shopping, including online shopping. So, sometimes they think they're going to maybe give this to someone. Oftentimes they don't. And it's QVC, it's Amazon, it's whatever. And they don't buy just one broom or one, appliance. They buy 10 or 15 or what have you. And we'll talk a little bit more about dementia as we go along, but hoarding could possibly related to some level of cognitive decline, so dementia, depression, Alzheimer's disease, etc. So depending on what literature you look at, the scope of the problem with regard to this, anywhere between 2 and 6%, most will hover around that 4% of the population shows a hoarding behavior. And that percentage increases to over 6% for people over the age of 55. Around 75% of individuals who are hoarding also have a co-occurring mental health condition. And you can read there, a good significant population, 15%, also have depression going along with that. And we'll talk about social isolation here in just a moment. But we'll talk more about this. But again, about 4% of the population have some level of hoarding disorder. Sorry. There we go. I go to the chat or something and then I can't get back to doing my slides. So I'm not going to read these consequences at you. You can certainly read these, and I think you know these already because we're certainly living this. I want to jump in and talk about the types of hoarding. And if this applies to any of you, don't let on. Don't tell us, or maybe you want to tell us in the chat. But digital hoarding, I'll tell you what affects me. Mea culpa here. Digital hoarding. This is the accumulation of digital files, and we're seeing this more and more. And the signs of this. So you accumulate these digital files, even if they're unimportant. So you have endless emails, you have all of these folders, you have, and we go to the second bullet point, these unused files. You hold on to stuff for a long time and you're like, well, I might need that, or I might be able to use that. And I will share, I full on do this, but full disclosure, I actually pull out things. I apologize. that are ancient old. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I have the tendency to pull out things from the early 90s or late 80s and retool them. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a functional digital hoarder. I'm not sure. But anyway, you find these files difficult to locate. You have three external hard drives, two laptops, whatever. You have the cloud, all this stuff, and you're very much emotionally attached to these files. And I think what we see more than even files is photos. People collect all of these photos, and you went to your grandson's first birthday. Yeah, you need maybe 10 or 15 photos. You don't need 215 photos. You don't need to categorize everything. And again, most people don't go back and look at those. They don't know how to catalog them. They don't know how to find them, even if they wanted to look at them. Shopping hoarding. And again, we're starting to see even more of this. And what's interesting about shopping hoarding, and I don't know what you're experiencing, but again, sometimes it's food, it's collectibles, it's cleaning supplies, which is really interesting. And some of these things that they're purchasing are potentially unsafe. So there's propane tanks down there, and I'm seeing a lot of people purchasing, and I'm sure there's a name for them, those small little canisters that go onto the side of your camp stove, those little, propane tanks that go on your camp stove or something. Survival gear, thinking. So again, you tap into not just hoarding, but maybe some sort of other mental disorder where they are afraid of for their own safety, or something there that they think that they need this survival gear. So that's shopping hoarding. And they're shopping for things that, again, they don't need them. They don't have a use for them. And kind of a derivative of that is food hoarding. So this could take a couple of different looks. First is shopping for food, whether that's fresh or that's pantry or whatever. When your pantry's full, your refrigerator's full, your freezer's full, but you're still shopping for additional food. You're squirreling away for some unknown reason. The other thing that happens with food hoarding is that they don't throw away food that is no longer good. So if that's in your pantry and it's a box of mashed potatoes and it's 3 months past your expiration, life goes on. I think you're going to survive that. But if it's something in your refrigerator that has rotted, they hold on to that and they eat it. That's the problem. And there's a reason why they hold on to it. And we'll get into some of these reasonings in a little bit here. But so we're seeing illness related to that. The other piece is when that is rotted and it's hanging out in my living space, I see vermin, I see rats, I see mice, whatever that happens to be. Now, a kind of a derivative of this food hoarding is medication hoarding. And it's one that we don't really think of, but I got a medication for whatever condition. I didn't take it all. It's in my cabinet. I didn't take another one in its entirety. It's in my cabinet, so on and so forth. Some of those have expired. Or I'm taking another medication and suddenly I go to my medicine cabinet and I start taking this other medication and I see medication interactions. I see drug reactions, et cetera, because I've hoarded that medication. Again, a serious issue. Garbage hoarding. So again, this is this inability to discard, but the bigger problem is they'll go and rummage through someone else's trash and bring those things back home. Now, again, mea culpa. I have done this. I tell a story and people laugh at me. I was out for a run one morning and my neighbor was throwing away a pool lounger, and it was the exact same pool lounger that I have in my yard, and it was in great shape. I don't know why they were discarding it. So I ran home and got the car and brought it home. So I think maybe that was okay. But folks who are true garbage hoarders, they don't necessarily decipher between what is harmful, what is useful. And again, they're bringing in things like discarded propane tanks and such. They're bringing in food from those dumpsters and they are eating it, etc. It's chemicals, it's cleaning supplies, it's things that are well past their expectancy. Recycle hoarding is a derivative of this, if you will. And again, this person fears waste for whatever reason. So they think, I'm going to take this and I'm going to upcycle it, kind of like that show. What's that show? Help me, a flea market flip, if anybody watches that, where they find these things and they're like, oh, I'm going to turn it into a bar cart or a vanity. And that's all they seem to make for some unknown reason. But anyway, they're going to fix it up. They're going to repurpose it. and maybe give it to somebody else. Maybe they're going to take it to the recycling center, but the good intentions, they don't actually go through with them and it ends up in their living space. Paper hoarding, serious, serious problem with our seniors because, and it's not just this difficulty discarding the paper, it's not looking through some of that paper. So they're getting invoices, they're getting bills, books, magazines, what have you, and it stacks up. So it's a tripping hazard, it's a fire hazard, what have you. More important than that, some of the things that we see is that I have my Medicare, enrollment sitting there, and I don't even see it because it's just in this stack. Or I have a bill, an electric bill or a heating bill. That just happened to somebody in my community, and they came. I work at a food pantry. I volunteer there, and they came to us for help. Their electricity was turned off because the bill just sat in this stack, and they had no idea that it was there. So we see this leading to other issues, not just, falls and tripping, but possibly financial issues as well. Sentimental hoarding. Gosh, do I tell you, mea culpa here? Yeah, again, these are folks that, hold on to things from the past because it reminds them of their loved ones or a time past or, someplace they went or a person they used to be. Maybe something that they were deprived of at a very important period of their time. And, again, it's okay to hold on to, I don't know, the baby clothes or a baby blanket or whatever. A few, not boxes and boxes and boxes. They have an excessive attachment to some of these things and feel very, very uncomfortable if somebody touches them, if they move them, what have you. Then we see the collector hoarder. I remember, gosh, I was fresh out of school when I was doing a home care visit, and an individual was a doll, quote unquote, collector. And she didn't, excuse me, just collect dolls. She collected anything that had to do with dolls: heads, arms, legs, shoes, feet, eyes. She also collected eyeglasses and every piece or part that went along with eyeglasses. So a lot of times this starts as a collection, but then it morphs into keeping anything even remotely related to that. Again, snow globes, trains, whatever it happens to be. Animal hoarding. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of this person as well. Again, you have to step back and say this person's, their heart is probably in the right place. They want to help animals. They want to do a good thing. They want to share their love for those animals, but they just can't manage it. At some point, their resources are exhausted. They can't take care of them. And then the things that fall by the wayside are these things: their waste management, their flea or heartworm or what have you, exercise. They can't pay the vet bills, such that then they are living in a situation where there's a lot of, again, excrement and dirt and such. And then finally, extreme hoarding. And this is the one you see on that show that's on TV. What is it called? Hoarding, Bury Alive, or whatever. This is what the media thinks that hoarding is. And it does get to this point at sometimes where those rooms are completely useless, or it's gotten to a point. Somebody was telling me they were working, again, doing home care, or maybe it was senior housing, I don't remember, and went into the kitchen and there was so much on the floor. The floorboards had rotted through such that this person was at risk for falling. It was in senior housing, falling into the apartment below. That is extreme hoarding. And unfortunately, this person knows that they are in that situation. They are embarrassed. They don't want to allow people in. They don't want people, to come in and help them. They don't allow repair people in if it's, the gas or the water or whatever. So again, you run into that risk. And then it's just a breeding ground for mold, for roaches, for, mice, for rats, for whatever happens to be there. Now, there's definitely a difference between hoarding and collecting. Again, maybe starts as collecting, but if you're a collector, I will tell you, I'm a collector. My son collects stamps. He collects baseball cards and football cards and stuff. I collect, of all things, classic cars, which is a little odd, but I'm very proud of those. My son is really proud of that. They love them. They're organized. They're displayed, etc. We derive pleasure from that, not shame or guilt. If I'm a hoarder, that's just it. It's cluttered, it's disorganized, I can't find things. I feel some level of shame related to that. And again, we go back to that definition. The hoarder accumulates just the joy of possessing that item. They're not going to allow somebody into that space to see all of that. And you see that, especially when you watch that TV show that's on. The family comes in, it's like this, this look of shock, right? Because they haven't seen it. They haven't been allowed in. And they're like, wow, how did it get to this? The last time I saw you, it wasn't like this. How can I help? And again, oftentimes that's how you know that you truly are a hoarder. It's that look when somebody comes into your space. So what are the risk factors? What are the whys behind this? Some of it is personality. So people who have trouble making decisions, people who have difficulty with problem solving, organization, attention, all of those frontal lobe kinds of things could lead to a risk factor for hoarding. Family history. Somewhere in here, I have a quote. I'll read it to you. But oftentimes, if you had a parent or someone who was a hoarder, you have a strong propensity to be a hoarder as well. And then stressful life events, and I think we'll talk about this on another slide as well, but maybe it's the death of a loved one, or it's divorce, or something related to finance, some personal trauma that you had, earlier in your life, that you grew up in poverty, or you lived in precarity, etc. So all of those stressful, all those traumas, if you will. And there's a way to address those traumas. Unfortunately for the hoarder, they use hoarding as a way, as a coping mechanism to deal with those stressful life events. Now, again, reasons why people hoard, there's this intense attachment to the object. They think it has intrinsic value, or that they want to, and I apologize, I can't see. Give me a second here. I'm turning off my camera for a second, because I need to turn my laptop completely because of the glare in my office. I apologize for that. Or an assumption that they're going to use it, right? The reality is, we can see hoarding at any age for an individual, but we see it mostly with our seniors. Many aging seniors who hoard already have some history of hoarding behavior, and it just gets worse as they age. So again, reasons why. Again, I'm not going to read these at you. The two that jump out at me are the fear of running out of things. Maybe they have lived in poverty or precarity. They've been taught that disposal is wasteful because they didn't have something growing up or at some formative time in their life. I talked about family history, genetics, traumatic loneliness, and social isolation. Again, I think this is one of our big takeaways here. What can we do to foster involvement, to foster purpose and meaning for individuals so that maybe they don't feel lonely or isolated? Because when they do, sometimes they collect all of these things and it's their way of coping with that. Another thing that again jumps out at me here is this decreased energy. So maybe as I age, if I am frail, if I'm at risk for falls or I have some other mobility issue, I could keep up with my collection. I could keep up with my stuff prior to that. But now I don't have the physical ability to, and I keep obtaining more, and I become a hoarder because I can't keep up with it. And here is okay. Sun has gone away, so I'm back. So again, when we go to the family, here's that quote, and this was from one of my patients at one point, and she said, "I call my mom a hoarder because she is. I just had no idea that I would become one too. I thought of my childhood and the shame I felt that my house wasn't like my friends' houses." So here's somebody who realized her mom was a hoarder, and she became a hoarder herself. So again, difficult feelings, childhood experiences, again, poverty, belongings, etc., not having money, neglect, abuse, all of this as a coping mechanism. So again, another takeaway there, what can we do to foster some other type of coping mechanism for this individual that is not hoarding? I'm not going to read this at you, but again, you can read some of the health issues that might possibly lead to hoarding, and we'll talk about dementia here very specifically soon. Again, poor decision making, procrastination, so on and so forth. The thing that I want to hit on here is that it's really easy. maybe not for us, because I think we get this, but maybe for others to see hoarders as dirty, as lazy, as whatever. And what is that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The more they hear it, the more internally they believe it. And we'll talk about stigma and shame here in just a moment. But the more they hear it, the more they tend to believe what it is that we're saying about them. Okay, turning laptop again. I may just stay dark for a little bit. So again, the effects of hoarding, we've already talked about this, but I do want to mention just, if you are in assisted living, if you are in some level of senior housing that is regulated, if you are in, some healthcare environment, there's literally, figuratively, no space for hoarding. And to a large degree, the health code is much stricter, doesn't allow for collection of those materials. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to try. And people ask me all the time, like, okay, what do you do in those situations? And again, every situation is going to be different, but I would always start with what is your move in agreement? What does your move in agreement say? And what do you allow? What do you not allow? If you start to see those behaviors, you need to intervene. Do you allow them to bring that at the get-go, et cetera? And again, this is where maybe you call in an ombudsman, you call in Department of Health or whoever is in your community to help you with some of these things as you start to see it really get bad, but it may come down, unfortunately, to a point of you have violated our agreement of our community, and this is grounds for eviction unless we do X, Y, and Z to remedy this. So I already mentioned, again, some of these effects. You will see, to a large degree, conflict, distress, relationship issues, particularly if the hoarder is sharing that space with other family members or a significant other or what have you. And again, maybe that's not your job to go in and mediate, but can you refer them to some level of counseling or some support groups or something to address that? Other effects. There we go. These are the physical effects. And again, you can read all of these. We talked about, conflicts, poor nutrition, food poisoning, so on and so forth. Fire risk. That's a big one. Again, if I can't get around my living situation, if there's not a clear path or I'm not allowing someone in, should I have an emergency? Can EMS get to me? Can the fire department get to me? So that's a really big one. And we'll talk about how do you address this. And we're always going to start at a place of safety with some of our I statements. I am very concerned about your safety and well being. Should something happen, I'm very concerned that the fire department can't get to you, etc. So we're not saying, oh my gosh, you need to clear this junk. It's a mess in here. I'm concerned, and here is why. So again, it could be legal issues. As I said, they're not getting the mail, they're not going through documents, what have you. Social emotional, we talked about some of these. Shame is very, very real. Managing their daily, just their general daily tasks. Um, and this I want to talk about here for a second because there are misconceptions, there are stigma out there. The media refers to panic buying as hoarding. You have a big storm coming up and you go out and buy 36 rolls of toilet paper. Personally, I don't understand why you need 36 rolls of toilet paper for a storm. That's just me. But just because you bought that doesn't mean you're hoarding toilet paper. It means you're getting ready for a storm. There's a big difference. People who have a lot of clutter calling themselves hoarders. And again, your garage might be a hot mess. You might need to clean it up, but you may not be a hoarder. Again, there's a big difference. Is your living situation still viable? Is it still livable? And again, hoarding is not necessarily the same as being disorganized. Hoarding is when I can no longer sit on my couch because I have stacks of mail all over the place. I can no longer sit at my kitchen table because it's covered with, whatever. The reality is people will jump in and immediately start to clean. I think we all know that's not going to help the situation, right? Because if I go in and clean, they're just going to hoard again because I didn't involve them in the process. And again, that's one of our big takeaways. If their living situation is clean, it's probably because somebody did step in and clean it for them. They are not necessarily collectors. They're not lazy. They are not dirty. They are not unmotivated. Can they stop hoarding? Yes, yes. But it's going to take a lot of people. And it's not just social work, and it's not just case managers, and it's not just, one person. It's a team of individuals, and it's going to take a lot of time. The reality is, this didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be cleared up overnight. That said, will you have a situation where it is so bad that you have to address it like right now and make a dent? Yes. And again, that's where you have that very frank conversation. Hey, look, this is the situation. You are going to be evicted. We are going to cancel your lease. Whatever it happens to be, unless we get this under control. If you want to be part of the process, now is your time. Because if you're not, then someone's going to do it for you. And are you okay with that? And it's a very frank conversation and a really tough one to have, but it is one that sometimes needs to be had. Again, there are three additional levels of stigma. They aren't like me. And again, that person knows this, that they aren't like other people, that people consider them or think that they are bad. People think they are to blame. And I don't believe, and I'm going to pause for a second. I don't believe anybody intends to hoard, right? I don't think anybody wakes up and says, "Woohoo, I think I'm going to be a hoarder today." No, it just kind of happens because of something else that happened in their life situation. Maybe again, it is some sort of mental illness or what have you, but they're not necessarily to blame. And again, we start to talk about takeaways. This is a judgment-free zone. We are going to treat them with empathy and compassion and etc. And be their a trust partner in this to help them through it. So I'm not going to read these at you, but just some things to know. How do you know if you're hoarding? Your living conditions cramped. There's that out of date medications. You may only realize you're hoarding because people, when they come into your space, they show it on their face, right? You realize that you are hoarding, but you don't know how to stop. What if you don't know that you're hoarding? This is the harder part because taking part in some sort of intervention is going to be a real challenge. And again, for us, looking at this situation, we're going to have to bring it up and bring it up and bring it up and bring it up multiple attempts to begin that conversation about changing their habits. It's not going to happen with a one and done. The reality is, though, how you approach the situation makes all the difference in the world. And we'll talk about interventions here in a moment. But this person is looking for someone they trust. I don't know who that is. That could be a well meaning volunteer. That could be a family member. I don't know who that is, but it has to be this person who they trust. And if that person pushes too hard, too fast, you've just lost it. You've completely lost it. You don't want to add conflict. You don't want to argue about things. Again, we show empathy, we show support. Okay, so I'm going to go a different direction here for just a moment, and I want to go through four standardized assessments that are out there. Again, these may not be in your repertoire, but these are available in the public domain, free to download. I think they're helpful to kind of decide, is it hoarding or is it something else? So the first one is the UCLA standardized assessment, which I love. There are six criteria. All six of them need to be met in order for a hoarding diagnosis to be delivered. Now, I realize that we are not diagnosing. I totally get that, but can we look at this and say, yes, this is hoarding, this is kind of borderline, or no, this is something else that I need to address? So I'm not going to read all of these at you. I'll read the criteria, but you'll see that each one of them has very specific questions. So, criteria A, persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of value. That's the definition of hoarding, right? And there's a few questions there. Criterion B, this difficulty is due to a perceived need to save items and to distress associated with discarding them. And then a few questions. The difficulty discarding possessions results in the accumulation of possessions that congest and clutter active living areas, et cetera, et cetera. If living areas are uncluttered, it's only because somebody else intervened. And then again, a few questions. The hoarding causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, including maintaining a safe environment. Now, that occupational could be a true work type of thing that the person needs to do. We could also use occupational in the sense of things that I need to do, as in ADL, IADL, those sorts of things, occupational types of things. And then again, the questions. The hoarding is not attributable to another medical condition, brain injury, CVA, something else, a bleed, whatever. And finally, the hoarding is not better explained by the symptoms of another mental disorder. So all six of those need to be in place. What I love about this assessment or these next two slides, there's some specifiers. One of them is insight. Do they have good, fair, poor, absent, delusional? What type of insight does this person have? And then the risk assessment. I love this. So I'm an occupational therapist by background. And this is meaningful to me. So I go in and I can assess that risk. Fire hazards, or their blocked exits, or their insects or infestations, the risk of falls, unhygienic situation, neglect. And we didn't even talk about that. So I may have, I might be an adult who has children living with me and I'm neglecting them because of because of my hoarding. Or maybe I have someone who is disabled. I'm a senior and somebody who's disabled living with me, and I'm neglecting that person. And that takes a whole other look. I mean, that is abuse, and we are mandatory reporters, and we would address that. But neglect, I mean, is there animal hoarding? So again, looking at some of those risks. There are a few other inventories that go along with this, and one of these I'm actually going to go through here in just a minute, but looking at ADL and how does that impact a home environment index. So if you are going in, you are the case manager, you are a building manager or whatever, and you're in their apartments, we can do this home environment type of assessment. The next assessment tool is something called the hoarding rating scale. And you can look at this. It's scored anywhere between 0 and 8, no problem, up to extreme problem. Anything 14 or more would be indicative of a hoarding disorder diagnosis or an HD diagnosis. 5 questions. This is easy. I think this can be incorporated into anything that we're doing. Because of clutter, how difficult is it for you to use the rooms of your home? To what extent do you have difficulty discarding ordinary things that people would get rid of? To what extent do you currently have a problem with collecting free things or buying more things that you need? And again, we didn't talk about free things, but a subset of shopping, right? That people will go, and my mother in law did this, and I would probably call her a hoarder. I have to be honest. Anytime she traveled, she brought home all of the soaps and shampoos and all of this stuff from her hotel room, and when she passed, I found closets and closets and closets filled with these types of things and napkins and stuff like that. To what extent do you experience emotional distress because of this? And to what extent do you experience impairment in routine, job, school, social, etc., because of this clutter? So, 5 easy questions. Again, there's your 0 to 8 score. A score of 4 or greater on questions 1 or 2. Score of 4 or greater on question 4 or 5 would be clinically significant. So if we go back to 1 and 2, difficult to use the rooms of your home, you can't discard, and 4 or 5 are emotional distress and impairment. So, and again, I'm not going to read this at you, but this is the interpretation. This next one, again, I'm not going to read this at you. There's a ton of questions. This is a 23-item questionnaire that would be given as a self questionnaire. I wouldn't interview the person, but you can see the rating scale. And you would rate it anywhere between none, and again, a little, a moderate, most, or almost all. And there are 23 questions. In the past week, how much control do you have over urges to acquire? Do you have difficulty throwing things away? Distressing for throwing things away? Uncomfortable if you couldn't acquire something? Does it cause you distress because of the clutter? You can't control the clutter. How often do you feel compelled to acquire something you see? Does it prevent you from inviting people to visit? So on and so forth. And I love this particular one. It's pretty long. Again, you would give it to somebody, then they would fill it out. But oftentimes, folks will just make up their own assessment tool or their own screening tools. And I think you can pull from some of these questions if that is something that you wanted to do. Final one is the clutter rating scale. And this one is so, so simple. There are 3 different sets of pictures, and anything that is a 4 or higher is considered or indicative of a hoarding disorder. So you go into somebody's space and you're like, wow, this is really messy. Oh, it's really only a 2 on this scale. It's probably not hoarding disorder, or maybe it's a 9 on this scale. So it's a quick visual. And these are the photos of the kitchen. These are the photos of the bedroom. And again, anything 4 or higher would be indicative of hoarding disorder. And then finally, of the living room. And if there are more rooms of the home, we would use the living room photos. Unfortunately, and people have asked me, there is no slide or no photo set of outdoor spaces. And we do see outdoor spaces where we see cars and junk and what have you, cluttering their living space. Okay, so let's go into strategies. And we've already talked about some of these. So hopefully we'll be able to go through this a little more quickly. I'm going to highlight that second bullet point. The worst thing you can do is just go in and start throwing away, right? We need to have that trust. We need to collaborate with this person. They need to be part of the process. We have to tell them, look, I'm not going to touch your stuff without your permission. You are going to be part of this because again, they need to feel safe. Remember, they've done this or they're in this situation because of maybe some trauma or what have you. So take a page out of trauma informed care. They need to feel safe with us, that we're going to back them up. So we said, make them a part of the process. Approach it with the idea of health and safety. I already said that. Consider those control issues. And I already said this too. Remind them if they're not part of the process, if they don't start making decisions, somebody else is probably going to make them for them. They want to be part of this. Maybe it is drafting an agreement. We're going to focus on, you know, 2 rooms today or one space today or something this week or something this month. And they have to sign off on that as an agreement and cheer the small victories. I worked with somebody who hadn't seen her countertop, and I can't tell you how long. And we started to clear, and we may have cleared, like, I don't know, a 12 by 12 square off of her countertop, and she cried. I haven't seen that countertop in X amount of time. And we celebrated. We were so excited. And she cleaned a few more inches, a few more inches, a few more inches. And those small victories, those small baby steps are what got her to a position of finally clearing the whole counter, the whole kitchen. So, again, celebrate that, even those teeny tiny little wins. Some of these I think are really, pretty intuitive. Assign a point person, again, whoever that is, somebody who they trust, work together. Address that social isolation. We talked about that. At least 15% of our folks, as I said, have some level of depression versus 2 to 5% of the general population. So, what are we doing to offer opportunities for meaningful engagement so I'm not turning to hoarding as a coping mechanism? We mentioned being compassionate, etc. Take it slow. Set those small goals. Maybe it's a timer. I use music with my folks. I'll say, okay, we're going to listen to 3 of your favorite songs. During those 3 songs, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And you stay focused for that amount of time. Make a plan. Maybe it's an hour a week or what have you. Or I don't know. Oh, it's in under here, establishing rules. I'm doing this with my parents right now. If you've not used it in X amount of time, we need to consider, donating it or what have you. And typically that's 1 year, but you can be very generous. I'm being very generous with my parents. If you haven't used it in 3 years, we need to consider doing something with it. Cancel things like magazine subscriptions, put up a no junk mail sign. Explore activities that don't involve buying or saving. So, rather than buying gifts for people, look at experiences, going out to dinner, going to the theater, what have you. Before and after pictures are really awesome to track progress. Um, Finding a support group, again, easy things like that. We've talked about some of these. I like this idea of removing items immediately. So we have 3 bins, one for keep, one for donate, one for discard. And it may take you 5 passes to get something in the discard bin or in the donate bin. And that's okay. It's going to take some time. But as soon as it's in that bin, get it out of there because if we don't, it'll come right back into that space. And again, rejoice every time you clear an area, you clear a room, etc. Now, I want to talk about dementia just for a moment here because we do see hoarding behaviors for individuals with dementia, but for them, I don't know that it's hoarding as much as it is rummaging. And we can make rummaging be a very productive activity. Give them a rummaging center where they can rummage, and then you put the items back that they can rummage another day. Make it an activity. Give them things to sort and organize. Those are activities. And oftentimes, again, this person is looking for things from their past. So bring in photo albums or a yearbook. I'm watching this with my dad, who does in fact have dementia, and he is hoarding collectibles like fishing collectibles and stuff. But really, what he's looking for is he wants to reminisce his past, the people that he used to go fishing with. So again, pulling out those photos, yearbooks, what have you, helps them to connect to their past. Now, if it is dementia, sometimes they do. Lose some of those things that could be valuable. So if that's the case, if it's valuable, it's a passport, it's jewelry, whatever, put that in a very safe place. Maybe it's dummy items of certain things like, glasses or keys or the remote control or something like that. Now you also have to identify those places where they're going to hide things. So, it could be the couch cushion, if it's the washer, the dryer, the dishwasher, the trash bin, the sink. I don't know. Maybe you attach a tracker to easily lost items, checking those hiding places, pockets of coats and things like that. And again, maybe preventing those from being used. So things like a disposal strainer or what have you. Personally, I don't like hard to open latches. I feel like that's an issue with dignity, but possibly something like that or camouflage might work. We do see issues with mailboxes. So again, people who are paper hoarders, they'll go take someone else's mail. So maybe it is a lockable mailbox for this person or their neighbors as well. Some do's and don'ts. I think we've talked about some of these. We've talked about connecting, etc. Agree that these items are important, and I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but what you are going to want to do is talk to this person about their items in a language that mirrors what they're saying. We're not going to call it junk, we're not going to call it clutter or garbage if they're calling it things or objects or collections or whatever. So we're going to follow their lead because that helps to develop that trust and that understanding with that person. Absolutely keep everything confidential unless we have to report something for a specific reason. Again, it's abuse or whatever, or we have to report it to Department of Health or whatever. Keep it confidential. I feel very, very strongly that we need to say, look, I know this situation. I'm here to help you. Do I have your permission to share this with so and so we can come together and figure out how we're going to help you with this? That's going to go a long way to building that trust. And again, asking, being very respectful, being patient, being non judgmental. And with everything that we do, I know better. I know you all are already there. Sometimes it is hiring a professional service, and there are people who come in and do that. But if we're going to do that, if that person is going to hire someone, what's the after step? Are they moving locations? How are we going to prevent this from happening again? Again, that's where that draft agreement maybe come in. I think we talked about this. Encouraging professional help, offered help, and that help isn't just now while we're in the cleaning process. It's long after. You can't just go in and be there a week or two sessions or whatever, and then run away. We have to be there. Somebody has to be there for the long haul. Maybe that's not you. That could be somebody else. We got to figure out who that point person is. I mentioned those I statements. I feel overwhelmed. I feel worried about your safety with all of, the clutter that I see in your home. How can I help you? Again, listening actively, offering that support. I keep going back to that. It's empathy, it's trust, it's compassion and communication. Some of the don'ts, don't make fun of them. Don't say, let's just clean up, let's get rid of this. Don't get angry. And people do get angry. And that's something that we need to think about too. We may lose patience, we may get upset. What are our coping mechanisms? What are the coping mechanisms that we're teaching to the family members of individuals who might be living with a hoarder? Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's yoga or, something like that, mindfulness types of interventions. Don't reason right away. They've been living like this for some time. And again, we have to go at this, kind of slowly. Don't touch their items, particularly without permission. Don't treat them like a child. Don't treat them like a criminal because they're not a criminal. They didn't do anything wrong, right? And don't make a task list for them because it'll never get accomplished. Give them one small thing to do and have somebody do it right alongside them, helping them. Um, because if you give them this long task list of things to do, it'll just be left undone. Don't argue, don't be discouraged, don't minimize this challenge, and don't necessarily give them ultimatums. Don't give them threats because oftentimes those threats are just empty threats. They don't, people don't follow through with them. Don't threaten unless you absolutely intend to follow through with that. Um, don't tell the person, again, we talked about consent, don't enable. And I think this is really a message to our family members, when we bring in gifts or that sort of thing. Don't make it worse. Give them experiences, etc. And again, don't clean up after them. We mentioned that. I think I mentioned this, but remember, this person didn't choose this. But the reality is, they are at a safety risk. They are at a risk for having health problems. And that's where your I statements can come in. I am worried about X, Y, and Z. And again, I think we mentioned this, but we have to, it causes us a lot of stress, anxiety, their loved ones as well. And again, maybe it's mediation, maybe it's something to help them to resolve that stress in a very positive way. This is one of my favorite slides, and it's like toward the end here. Focus on the person, not on the possessions. There's so much more than they're hoarding. They were, an engineer. They were a productive member of society. They were a member of the Elks Lodge. I don't know what they were. Focus on who they are as a person. Don't make it all about their hoarding. Really highlight their strengths. Address those underlying conditions. Again, that's where health, some sort of medical evaluation may come into play, but bond over things and talk about other things other than the hoarding, other activities, other ways that we can bond with this person. And this is what I already mentioned. Again, it's a diary, it's relaxation, whatever. This is how we cope with our difficult feelings. Maybe these are ways that we can teach them to cope so that hoarding is not their coping mechanism. Some additional approaches, and again, I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. Don't purge without consent. We've talked about that. Using that team approach, I think we talked about that. Consider boxing with permission and stacking. If you are working in a situation where you may have a health inspector come in, it gives a very neat, orderly appearance to that space. We can then go through it another time. What's important about that stacking, though, is that that person can still see those stacks of boxes. Because if you stack and then take it out of their space and you store it somewhere else and they can't see it, it just builds their anxiety about their possessions. And we don't want to do that. So we need to find a way that they can still have access to, they can still see that. Again, I think we've talked about this. We talked about the three-step plan. I don't think I need to go back through that. I already mentioned again, immediately removing all of those items immediately and protecting individuals' rights. And I think this is important because this is still their living environment. We can't just barge in and fix the issue. We can't push too hard. We have to take it in those baby steps when we are in that space, having those initial conversations. But we do have to protect their right to dignity, their right to their own individual living space. And again, this is where maybe it's an ombudsman, it is the health department, somebody might be able to help us. And accessing those community resources, again, maybe it is a mental health specialist. There are support groups out there for these individuals as well. I think we've talked about this. We're not going to pressure them to let us in on their space. It's not a total cleanup. It's trying to getting back to a livable space. And include them in the calls to authorities. I do want to highlight that one for just a moment because there might be a situation where we do have to call in someone else because they are hoarding animals and we have to call animal control or whatever. That's again where you have that conversation. Look, I need to make this call. I have no choice. And here's why I don't have that choice. I want you to be a part of this. So we're either going to clean or you're going to be part of the call with me and you're going to be here when they arrive. So, how do you want to handle this? And it's kind of that tough love situation. Of course, I'm always letting them know that you're there to support them. We already said this, but this is a quote from one of my patients, one of my residents. Discarding is never a simple yes no process, and most items will be pondered over through several sort throughs over a period of months and years. And that is us saying, go slow. It's going to take some time. Another quote from someone, one of my individuals. I feel that my mom is at risk in the event of a fire if she has a medical emergency. The simple daily tasks that we take for granted are made more difficult and dangerous by the amount of stuff in her home and her attachment to it. So, this was, you know, that individual's recognition that mom is a hoarder and coming to us for help. How can I help them? Helping them to seek that treatment and that support. And I promise I just have a couple more slides here. They just need to clean up. And again, this is where you come to, okay, they can't live in this situation anymore. Maybe we do need to enlist that cleaning crew. Maybe it's time for a new home, a new apartment. Maybe we need to consider placement. If they've been living in their apartment, now it's time, maybe possibly to go to independent living or assisted living, where someone else, maybe there's kind of this other entity over that living space to make sure that the hoarding doesn't occur again. So this is my final note, and I apologize. I know it's a lot of information, short amount of time, and I'm going to read this one. It's easy to feel frustrated, perhaps even disgusted when we deal with a hoarder. However, we need to remember this represents a condition that's beyond their control. Through education, through patience, through teamwork, through compassion, through empathy, through patience, through understanding, through all of those things, communication, we can help restore the best quality of life. That's really what we're aiming for here. We want to walk alongside of them. We are not the keepers of this. We are collaborators. The person who is working toward the healing is this individual. We're there to hold their hand and help them along the way. So with that, I will put up my references, and I think that's then my last slide of references. So I will just pause. That's everything I had. If anybody has specific questions or comments or thoughts that you'd like to share, I'm happy to hang on for a minute or two. And if you don't, I'm going to pass it back over to Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. This is great information and great slides that certainly we will share the recording as well as the slides in PDF after this call today. I didn't see any questions in the chat from folks, but again, yeah, feel free to stay on for a couple minutes, unmute if you do have a question. One thing that I would ask, do you have that assessment tool, the link to the assessment tool that you could either put in the chat or send to me and I can send in the notes later today? That would be really helpful.
Which one? All four?
Yeah, that
Or
would be great.
let me
Yep.
see what I can
Okay,
find for you. Let me just make a note.
that's great. And then I can share that in
Hello.
the follow-up.
Yep,
Hello.
it's on my to-do list. I will do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, and I finally see somebody
Hi.
chimed in here and said that yeah, they're having an issue with Temu since everything is so cheap, for sure.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question.
Of course.
Um, I've been listening on the phone, even though I emailed for me to do the whole Zoom presentation. So I was wondering is there a certificate involved and how can I get it considering that I don't think I put in my phone number?
Are you asking
Because
for
my,
a certificate of attending this
yes,
webinar?
yes, but I went on the phone instead of the email.
Okay.
Because normally you send it through email, but I wanted to let you know I was on the phone. I was on the call, but
Just,
I
yep,
didn't put my email in there. I mean,
sure. If
you know
you
what I
put your
mean?
email in the chat, I'd be happy to make sure that the follow-up information gets to you.
Okay.
Are you able to put your email in the chat? It sounds like you're
Okay,
saying
hold
you're
on.
not web-based right now. You're just calling in and listening to the
No,
audio.
I was on the phone. So
Okay.
let's see. Hold on for a
What is
second.
your name? And I can,
Is Versa Little Versa VERSIA? I've been on the call the whole time.
okay.
VERSIA
Uh-huh.
dot little at CSI dot COOP.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course.
And I don't see anything
Hold
else
on.
coming in. So I'm just going to say to everyone, thank you for being here. I think this is, and I think it's a really timely issue, particularly as the holidays are coming up, and folks, may purchase, gifts and such for their loved ones, for people that they know. So maybe we can guide them a different direction, have some of those talking points. So again, Sarah, thank you so much for having me, and
My
happiest of
pleasure.
holidays to everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone being here on the call today and look forward to getting back together in 2025.
Thanks. Bye bye now.